this is unequivocally the most exciting time to be in the group travel market. And for years, we've had to make that argument like, oh, group travel's relevant. I think people realize that travel in groups is not what your grandparents did and is not confining and is not 8 hours of horrific bus rides. There are so many unique opportunities to explore special interests, to increase family bonds, to learn something new through group travel that frankly just aren't available for individual consumers.
Welcome back to another episode of the Tourpreneur Travel Business Podcast. I'm Mitch Bach, your host, and every week we are talking to tour operators, industry luminaries, people who are movers and shakers in the tour and activity industry. And today we're in the luminary category. We are with Jeff Gayduk, a good friend, a media partner of Tourpreneur, and somebody who is uniquely positioned in the travel industry to have a bird's eye view of so much happening across the U.S. market and beyond in tours and activities. And Jeff Gayduk is the publisher of Premier Travel Media, which is a giant, I guess, agglomeration of different verticals of magazines and events and collaborations amongst different sectors of our industry, moving it forward and shining a light on everything that's happening. And so today, at the end of 2025, we are going to talk about what's ahead in 2026. Jeff, welcome to Tourpreneur.
Thank you, Mitch. Excited to be here. And I can tell it's the end of the year as you're running low on luminaries. So I'm happy to fill the spot pre-holiday as everybody's out shopping.
What did I miss in terms of how to position you for our audience? Like, what exactly is a Jeff Gayduk?
I think it's an interesting question because we do so many things. But if I were standing in an elevator with you at a travel conference, we're a niche media company and we connect buyers and sellers in various marketplaces. So whether that's student travel, leisure group tours, sports events and tournaments, international inbound travel, family group travel, or film production, which is a huge travel market that flies under the radar from a lot of folks. But we create products, whether that be print magazines, whether those be newsletters, websites, social channels, that help those buyers do their job better. And in the process, our commercial venture is that we connect them with suppliers, whether that be destinations, tour companies, cruise lines, hotels, resorts, attractions that want that business. I think the common denominator is that there's some sort of a group play within this. Obviously, we're not travel and leisure or Condé Nast. We're not really a consumer cycle, but really focusing on that B2B or that B2 hybrid, right? If you're planning a family celebration trip, you're not a standard consumer, but you're not a travel advisor necessarily doing that.
Great. So tell me a little bit more just about your read on group travel as a sort of entity within the larger travel industry, because, there's so much talk and blah, blah, in my opinion, about the death of groups because everybody's going to private tours, everybody's going to tech-enabled tour guides or apps, or people are just planning and booking their own travel. What to you is the state of group organized travel?
Yeah, I'll be quite honest with you, Mitch. In my career, and I've been doing this for over 25 years now, this is unequivocally the most exciting time to be in the group travel market. And for years, we've had to make that argument like, oh, group travel's relevant. Group travel's still here. There's students that want to go to Washington, D.C. and seniors that want to go down to Florida in the wintertime. And it was always a tough sell in the supplier marketplace. But what's happened so many things have changed since COVID, but we got to a point where we couldn't see each other over COVID. And at the same time, we started picking up all these hobbies and special interests and such. And group travel plays so well into that recovery phase that I think people realize that travel in groups is not what your grandparents did and is not confining and is not 8 hours of horrific bus rides. There are so many unique opportunities to explore special interests, to increase family bonds, to learn something new through group travel that frankly just aren't available for individual consumers. So, if you're a solo travelist, God bless you. If you want to travel with your partner around the world, I think that's phenomenal. but there's so many hidden opportunities within the group market that all these really interesting entrepreneurs have been able to bring out to create products that really to me fit the essence of what people are looking for today. It's been a 180-degree turn, frankly, since 2019 to today. We've seen organic growth really across all these markets. Obviously, some of them, hit pretty low in 2021, but there's so many unique and interesting opportunities out there. It's just a great time to be involved in the industry.
I think it's also a corollary point that two things can be true. Solo travel can be on the increase, but also group travel, that the industry is growing at an outpaced rate from GDP. And so as an industry, the bubble or the pie is growing across all of these different avenues. You were just at our event, Tour Week and TripCon in Charleston, South Carolina, and you led a fascinating session on kind of the niches that are exploding, but you also had a chance to engage with hundreds of different kinds of travel experience creators. And so I just wanted to start by getting a read on what you were noticing about the vibe, the chit chat, what's going on from your experience at the conference.
Yeah, I'd say it's really refreshing to be at your conference. I go to a lot of shows in the industry, and at some events, you tend to see the same people that have the same book of business that have been doing the same thing for seemingly forever, and that's fine. There's a lot, especially in the tour business. There's a lot of legacy operators there that have a certain process upon which they do things. I think the differentiation with Tour Week and TripCon is that you're bringing people there that are coming to learn, and they want to create something new and they want to create something better. And that energy is palpable. I mean, the opening session where you had the gentleman speak on Gullah heritage and culture, where we got up and we introduced ourselves to somebody new. And just that alone created this electricity in the room that you just don't see in other environments. So people are there sort of ready to hit the ground running. And the knowledge base, I think the other cool thing is so many people have a diverse experience base that they're bringing into the travel industry. Maybe they came from corporate America. Maybe they worked in government. Maybe they worked in education, and they're bringing what they've learned in that enterprise to the travel industry and applying all these great new tools that are out there. So just the synergies involved in that process, and the sessions were packed, right? I mean, you don't see that in a lot of conferences where, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, normally people are back checking emails at the hotel, or who knows, they're out sightseeing or whatever. You're standing room only in those events. So people come there to get better. And I think that's different than what we see in some of the marketplaces where it's more of like I hate to use the word meat market, but that's probably the best correlation I could draw. These appointment-based sessions for endless days, 3, 4 days in a row. And I think people get business done there, but is their business getting better, or are they just getting better hotel rates in Lancaster, Pennsylvania? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's no criticism of those other events because those are so necessary and just the relationship building that happens. I've gone to those
100%. Yeah.
myself where you need that face to face every year to just maintain that relationship, and you might not otherwise see them. So I think there's a lot of value in the way that gathering happens over there. And you're right, we have no interest in coming and duplicating the efforts of any other event. But what we notice is that there's this other kind of tour operator, quote unquote,
Mhm.
that is quite different because they're often newer. They're coming in and they're inventing new ways of gathering and doing things. And it's different than sort of, I'm Globus and I've been doing this kind of package tourism for 110 years or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
There's a spot for these marketplaces, but you came into this field and sort of recognizing that is what it is, and it's an effective way of doing business. If you're contracting hotels, you're going to want to talk to 10, 15, 20 hotels and find out what rates are to make sure that your tours are affordable. But really, from the standpoint of growing business, I think this is where you've really hit on something in the industry, especially for these small solo entrepreneurs.
so I want to dig into this world with you because, as you said, you're a niche travel industry sort of media company.
Mhm.
And I don't think you mean you're a niche because you actually cover the whole industry, but you cover niches. And one thing we are constantly preaching to these people that come in with this basis of experience and passion that is built from their life experience, what we preach is you should be using that to create a kind of experience that is uniquely you and is therefore niche and much more niche than coming in and just offering your standard 8-day Paris and London trip that is a copy of everything else on the market. So, can we dive in? And I just want to hear you bloviate and expound on the power and the state of like niches in
Yeah,
tourism today.
I think that's definitely where the opportunity is. You're not going to beat Globus on price on an 8-day Paris, France trip. That market's already been worked over for generations. So we use a phrase here called the riches are in the niches. I mean, that certainly applies to the tour business. And I think that if you can find something that's unique about what you do, about a certain passion that you have, about a mission that you're trying to serve, and you can develop a travel play off of that, whether that be a singular destination or whether that be a travel style that you can envelop. It may be age group based. It may be Generation Z travelers. It may be solo female travelers, where we had the panel discussion at Tour Week where we had two very distinct operators up on the stage talking about sort of what those hot buttons are. So I think that from an entrepreneurial standpoint is to really focus in on what makes you tick, where, when the times get really tough, what's going to get you up at 5 o'clock in the morning because you've got to get the rooming list together or you've got a departure heading out the door. And to be able to take whatever passion you have and apply that towards a travel business, that's what's going to carry you through those dark times, because it's not all rainbows and sunshines in the travel industry, right? I mean, we go through highs and lows and ups and downs, and especially as you're trying to build that, because it's a super competitive marketplace right now, and it's really hard to reach the end consumer. It's harder than it's ever been before, but the tighter niche you are, the easier that becomes if you have the right tools in place in which to make that happen.
I think it's an exciting time because never before could you reach an audience of people that are very, very odd in what they love, for example.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Given the right set of tools to be able to do that. But, taking your comment earlier, is you want to put together an 8-day France trip. Well, good luck being found on that. It doesn't exist.
So you've got these media verticals that
Mhm.
are covering larger kind of food groups of things like sports, students, film. I'm wondering if you could talk to me about just what you're seeing across these different niches or these different sectors of sub niches. What's hot right now? What are you seeing that isn't maybe noticed by your average tour operator?
Yeah. So quickly, three big events will drive business next year, primarily in the US. One is World Cup, where there's 16 cities across North America, Canada to Mexico. They're going to be hosting World Cup matches. They're expecting over 6.5 million visitors coming in for these matches. And I think what's interesting, about 40% of the travelers will come from overseas. And there is such a large gap between match dates that if you're not attending the World Cup match that day, you are a sightseeing tourist for what could be 10 days to 2 weeks between matches. So I think that creates an immense opportunity for anybody that would be sort of hub and spoke around these destination cities. So Miami, um, Houston, Dallas, Kansas City, up and down the West Coast, throughout the East Coast. There's sort of a box in the middle of the country where, for whatever reason, there's not a lot of World Cup matches outside of Kansas City. But that's going to be an immense opportunity to draw foreign tourists. Number two is going to be Route 66. Anybody along that trail, should see a spike in activity, and probably you're already gearing up for that. And the third one, of course, is America 250, which has definitely been slower culminate than the others have been. I think that's just because it's a government initiative and then there's state groups behind it. But I think as we start to roll into 2026, you'll start to see an increase in patriotism, some events being put on, and not just around July 4th, but sort of historical, whether that be reenactments in the South or whether that be museums that are doing special exhibits on our 250 history. So there's going to be more of a draw to that. And I think that will create some short-term opportunities. So, we've seen these macro trends in the travel industry where things maybe don't look great right now compared to the highs that we came off of with COVID. But this should really buoy us all. Aside from that, one of the benefits of being in so many different niche markets is that if one isn't doing great, then perhaps another one is. What I can say from an economic standpoint, sports events and sports tourism has really carried a lot of places out of the doldrums of COVID. It was the first market to come back. Parents will spend whatever it takes to make sure that their kid can play soccer or basketball or baseball or whatever you name the sport. And then we've also seen at the same time an increase in adults. And again, I can kind of attribute this to people sort of trying new hobbies or maybe getting back acclimated with sports and activities that they had played when they were younger, to where amateur events from a participation standpoint are also doing very well across the United States. Sports like pickleball, I mean, you're just not just from a recreational standpoint, but we track in our sports planning guide product facility developments, because that's what really is driving this train, is that there's just an unprecedented amount of governments that are spending on sports facility developments of all different shapes and sizes. And by far above and beyond anything else is pickleball facilities. And we're not talking about two courts at your local park district. We're talking about complexes that have 32, 64 pickleball courts with covered lighting and restaurants and bars. And, there's now themed establishments that are developing. And, those aren't 12-year-old kids that are playing pickleball. Those are 62, 72. There's now pickleball tours that are happening from that. So talking about earlier, sort of, picking a passion that you have and developing a travel play off that. I think there's some phenomenal opportunities there. So sports is definitely outperforming the industry. There, along with that, fan trips to see your team play overseas in another town. And it doesn't have to be Major League Baseball and NFL. I think that stuff has been done for years. I mean, I was a tour operator back in the 90s, and we would do Cleveland Indians, Chicago White Sox trips. Well, there's nothing new about that, but maybe there's a international soccer club that you can find a local fan base and people travel to see that group, and you can do some meet and greets and such. So there's plays around that fall outside the conventional. I think can present some opportunities for those that are passionate about sports. I can tell you a market that we're really passionate about right now, Mitch, is the student travel sector. And I think specifically what we look at there is a series of niches within a niche. So obviously, student travel is a niche market within the larger group travel industry. But I think the differentiation now in the market is we're seeing a lot of small groups, very specific, teacher-led trips that are circulating around STEM, small performance groups. So not necessarily 200 kids going to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade, but maybe it's just the strings that are going to compete in a, international competition down in Houston. So there's a lot of play around that. Career readiness, we're going through some seismic changes. It's kind of funny because every conference I go to has AI. Like, how is it going to change the industry? How is it going to change the travel business? I went from your show to the American film market. And just imagine all the disruption that's happening with AI in the film industry right now. And producers that are used to doing things a certain way can no longer do that. Well, imagine being 17 years old and, staring down the barrel of, is AI going to take whatever career I thought I was going to have? So there's now sort of a shift towards more skilled trades and opportunities. But that doesn't exist in plain sight. So you've got to dig really hard and go into these manufacturers and find an opportunity maybe to bring students in and do some hands-on and do some tours and meet with the engineers and meet with the front line and see, is this something that's really for me? So it's become more purposeful, I think, which is really unique. It's not just the class trip going to the, Great America type theme park, and that's fine. That's all really cool. And the band does an every 4 year to the Rose Parade. Those are sort of the staples of the student market, but really those sort of hidden sectors of we see groups doing college visits. So kids these days they're trying to figure out where they want to school starting at their freshman year in high school. There are operators that put together weekend college visit trips where they're going out, they're seeing 3 and 4 different colleges, they're eating in the cafeterias, they're meeting with the counselors, so kids can get a good feel of the size of the school, the location, special interests that they have. Again, that's existed, but the stakes are so much higher right now in our education system. And there are so many gaps in there. Travel opens so many eyes and so many opportunities. I think that's just a real hidden gem that some people are definitely taking advantage of, but there's certainly more opportunities there.
We specialize in just the strings section.
Yeah.
No, that's a
My
niche.
son plays a string instrument, so I can invoke some personal knowledge from that.
If you don't play the trombone, we're not interested in booking your tour.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
All of that is so fascinating. Where to begin? I want to begin with the basement of my apartment, which is a major gym,
Mm.
and they've just closed down the entire basketball court facility to repurpose it as pickleball.
Oh, there you
So,
go. Yeah, yeah.
so that is definitely on the rise. And what's interesting about that is it's part of what you're describing as niches that have untapped opportunity of the creation of new kinds of experiential inventory and
Mhm.
not just diving into these well-established markets. And, especially around sports tourism, I'm actually trying to wrap my head around it a little bit because I think there's a way in which you think of sports tourism as like traveling for, let's say, NBA finals or
Mhm.
some big event, and I'm sure that's one of the things. But I think you're also driving at the fact that every single weekend and sometimes weeks or holidays, moms and dads are packing up their kid and their hockey sticks and driving to Oklahoma, which I use as a very specific example because that is my sister-in-law's life. It's like driving to random cities and places with a whole group of boys and unpacking, and they play hockey there for a tournament or whatever. And is there, I mean, they're there basically as visitors, and yet there's not this like tour infrastructure for filling in the ancillary time that they have that they're not just playing hockey, which has to be something.
It's a huge opportunity for day tour operators in my mind, no matter where you are. And you're 100% spot on. You name the city, name the sport, and chances are seasonality dependent, of course. We're not playing baseball in Chicago in December, but just the proliferation of that industry and the growth that we've seen across the board creates opportunities because yeah, you're going there to play hockey, but you're not playing hockey for 16 hours straight. You might have one match or two matches during the day, and then your evenings are free. So, or you may not, you may be coming in on a Friday and your first match is until Saturday afternoons. Finding something specific that appeals to that group from that local tour operator or that destination standpoint versus just sort of letting them figure it out on their own, which often means they don't figure anything out. The kids kind of sit in the hotel rooms and on their phone or whatever it might be. But yeah, they are definitely tourists that are coming in. But it's not the NFL. They're not in meetings for 14 hours prior to hitting the field on a Sunday
Mm.
afternoon, right? This is fun and games, and it's often moms and dads, and then whatever the sibling is, plus could be grandma and grandpa coming along for that as well. So you got your own little multi-generational trip happening there.
Yeah. I think it's currently a segment that is being served by like LBE, location-based entertainment. Let's go play video games at Dave and Buster's and have a pizza party or whatever. Whereas I do feel like maybe they're like, oh wait, we could do something more experiential, more in line with like what the place is and make it feel elevate the experience of being in a destination.
Absolutely. And I think any good tour guide can customize something for groups of that nature. I know, we've done that certainly as a family where, we want to hire a tour guide in a city like San Antonio. And you just walk through, this is what my family is. This is what their ages are. This is what their interests are. So we're not just pointing at buildings for 3 hours straight.
Yep. But it's a different audience segment that you have to market to and essentially educate them that this is something that they could think about doing and that we cater to you as a hockey group, you know?
Absolutely, yeah, I think the cool thing about that as well, Mitch, is if you are, if you are looking at that sort of day tour operation, those events are booked up to 2 years in advance. I mean, there are full schedules out of just like the conventions coming into your town. None of that is a surprise, as far as what's happening and when. You can hook in with whatever that local facility is. I recommend anybody to have a strong relationship with their local convention visitors bureau. There's something called sports commissions, which basically operate the same way as convention visitors bureaus, often under the same charter, often in the same office, just a different logo. But they're in the business of facilitating those events, and part of it is obviously booking the space in, getting the room nights in, filling that facility. But the other part of it is making sure that people have a good time when they're in town, and just sort of leaving people to their own devices. I think that's an opportunity left on the table there right now.
You do a lot of work with DMOs, with CVBs,
Mhm.
with the tourism boards, the convention bureaus, whatever someone's calling them these days. I'm wondering what your read is on the secret to kind of a tour operator best understanding how to connect with DMOs, and also like what a DMO can do to serve that audience, either of a day or a multi-day tour operator with a
Yeah,
destination.
yeah. I think it's really two different stories. From the day tour operator, the equation is very simple to me. The DMO promotes the destination. You provide the product that people can book into. Everything that a DMO does is inspirationally driven. They've got social media teams, they've got content development teams, they have marketing teams. Their mission is to shine a very bright spotlight on that city and that destination. Come here, do this, come for this event. Theater is happening here, but they don't have a product. Where you come in as that local tour operators, you have the product around that. So I think that you'll find that DMOs, by and large, 99% of them are the friendliest people that you'll ever do business with, right? There's not a lot of no's from a local standpoint because they are there to support the community and to establish that relationship really with the marketing team, with the group sales team, and everybody will have every DMO of any size is going to have some sort of a sales team, to let them know that you're a resource for this sort of custom packaging. And I think from that may create some ideas. If there's a big festival coming into town, perhaps you can develop some specific programming around that, that will help people enhance their experience for that. So I think that they should be your marketing arm, and there's so much time and effort spent by day tour operators of trying to get people, to their website and get them to book. But if they just had a little stronger relationship with the DMO who's spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that, I think they would find that referral business would be more likely to convert because they've already convinced somebody that they want to come here. Now, what can I actually do when that happens? From the overnight tour operator perspective, I think it's a little bit different equation. Really, what they're looking for there is the operator wants ideas of what's unique. What can I do here that isn't sort of beaten down? What unique group experiences they have? So you're relying on that DMO for ideas on local flavor that you can add into an itinerary that's going to take a good trip and turn it into a great trip. And that is also one of their key ingredients because they should have their pulse on that local marketplace. If you're developing new tours, DMOs should be more than welcome to host you into that destination, so you can actually see, on the ground what experiences are there, meet the local vendors, because if you're trusting 10, 20, 30, name the number of travelers, you want to have some degree of trust that actually is going to turn out to be a good experience. So seeing it firsthand, I think is always really important, especially if you're doing any sort of volume there. But to me, they're really an untapped resource for those that are not on the inner circle of sort of how that business operates.
I think they sometimes also sit on mountains of data that they don't even know is helpful to you as an operator. It's
Mhm.
like you need to like probe them. You need to ask questions. I've always found that like the tour operator is kind of an odd entity in their ecosystem, even though they're very prevalent locally. I don't know. It strikes me as like something that needs education on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And and all destinations are different. I mean, I think if you look at a place like Savannah, there might be 35 different day tour operators in Savannah. So they should have their pulse on what's happening in that marketplace. And I suspect that they do without being intricately involved. But when you start getting into some of the second and third tier cities that don't have that sort of volume, that's where there's relationships to be had. And maybe that's a conversation that needs to take place early in 26 to extend that olive branch. And you're right. I think DMOs have certainly shifted their stance to be more data driven and sort of how they're approaching markets. We've certainly seen that. We've transitioned our media company. We used to be print magazines, print magazines, print magazines. Now, half these markets we serve, we don't even do print magazines anymore. It's all digital product. So, that's really just keeping up with what's happening in the industry because you can provide much more better metrics and you can target people better with that. And that's certainly led by our clients, right? And what their demands are.
So you look at like the World Cup, America's 250th anniversary, which will have a lot of different kinds of events and happenings all around the country. This, I think, applies to Taylor Swift and it applies to all sorts of other events that have become such a focus of why people are traveling. And I can't spend a day reading trend reports without people talking about events, film, film happenings, whatever it might be, or locations that are in the news. And this strikes me as an opportunity and a challenge for the tour operator of yesteryear, not the day tour operator, but the multi-day tour operator that used to think about structuring the tour as an experience of its own. And now in some ways, we're maybe talking about, at least the way I'm conceptualizing it, thinking of like, how could I create a 6-day experience of the region leading up to
Mhm.
Kansas City, where people are going to be for a very specific World Cup event, whatever it might be. And is that a thing? Like this is like a new way of designing a tour to be a little bit of a barnacle to an event and not just something to do when people are in destination or something to do a complete standalone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. One operator that we work with that specializes in the inbound market, she's aggressively packaging World Cup, what's available right now, because we're still, believe, even though it's coming next summer, we still don't know where teams are playing and actually who's playing. But she specifically decided not to package tickets in this. And it was a conscious decision just because of the way that that process works. So, but at the same time, here's an operator, and she's a very legitimate operator who's creating all these bespoke fan experiences in destinations across North America and doesn't even include a ticket to the event. Now, I would imagine most of her clients will secure tickets, but quite frankly, and taking a page from when you're talking about Taylor Swift, there are people that follow Taylor Swift on tour that never actually go inside a stadium. They go outside because the party and the vibes out there are almost as good, probably not as good, but certainly a lot cheaper than having to secure tickets for that. So yeah, I mean, specifically around World Cup, they're going to have an entire fan experience. They're going to have parks that are open. There's going to be themed bars. There's going to be, like-minded individuals. You can do meet and greets with local soccer clubs and such. So yeah, you can absolutely do that. And again, if that's your passion. Now, if you don't give a hoot about soccer, chances are that's going to kind of fall by the wayside somewhere. But if that is your niche, then absolutely you can create programs around that.
I just think this is kind of an exciting time because we're seeing a transformation of the way travel is packaged and delivered.
Yeah, well, certainly it's the experience that people are looking for. It's not just the destination that obviously is the center point of the trip, but the experience is really what it comes down to. We've seen this one market I haven't mentioned earlier is family group travel, celebration
Mm.
travel, anniversary travel, milestone events, where I think that market started as like the family reunion, and that's really kind of still a centerpiece of that family gathering, but now we're seeing specifically with the older generation that has the money and has the wherewithal is that they're funding these multi-generational trips. And whether that's a luxury yacht cruise, a week at Disney, or a cabin in the Ozark Mountains, there's, not only three generations, but you're seeing extended cousins, you're seeing friends along those lines. And the amount of spend on those specific events is just mind boggling. The Family Travel Association did a recent survey. I would encourage anybody who's interested to look, because they have an executive summary off of their website. I can't quote figures off the top of my head just because billions and billions tend to run together after a little bit. But that market continues to outperform. And again, yeah, I think one of the keys to success is follow the money. And the money right now in our society is with older Americans that have the disposable time and certainly the savings in which to fund those sort of activities. So whether they're going on a solo vacation or they're funding half or all of the multi-generational trip, that creates an opportunity. And certainly for tour operators, bespoke trips, because you have so many unique interests, it's hard to find a cookie cutter trip that can give you what you're really looking for. So you need that degree of customization, and big operators just aren't built for that to any large degree. And then from a day tour perspective of being able to create unique activities, you probably don't find off the shelf sightseeing trips that would really appeal to the vast majority of those folks, unless it's the, hey, let's get familiar 2 hour city tour of XYZ. So, you can develop specific programming for teens or for seniors within that group. So yeah, I think that market is hard to capture because you're talking about really a hybrid. Sometimes that's being planned by grandma, grandpa. Sometimes it's being planned by the mom and, sort of working in concert. They may invoke a travel advisor to do this. They may go to a tour
Hmm.
operator. They may do it on their own. But there's no real established pathway to which that does. Putting that out there, and again, if it's a product page on your website, letting people know that that's available, I think that's a good first step that you do this. And why are you an expert at it? Not just that you do it, but what makes you uniquely qualified in which to do that.
Yeah. Even just if I were visiting an Italian operator's website and then they had a thing that said custom multi-generational experiences,
Mhm.
I would click on that if that's what I was looking for. And I think it's so interesting. I was just reading an article about kind of Gen Z trends, and one of the big changes is that Gen Z just aren't leaving their home territory like Americans used to. Americans used to go as far away from their family as possible, like good little consumers. They'd go off on
Mm.
their own. They'd get their own property. They'd be, in a new city, and less people are leaving their kind of 20-mile radius of where they grew up. And that creates a different kind of customer and family. It might mean that your marketing says, are you, does your whole family need to like leave town, leave
Yeah.
the area and just like get out? It's like finding these new emotional cues that change the way you're marketing. I saw that early on when Kentucky kind of reinvented what they were doing and called it social travel. That was years ago. And
Yeah.
I'm
Smart.
watching, yeah, I think it's really smart. It's like saying there's a different trigger here that's probably more in line with that, 18 to 35 crowd that, went to college or finished high school online on Zoom, and they need friends. And so it's a different pull.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's social media in a sense unites us, but it also divides us. So travel is really the common element that allows for that human to human interaction. And I think in society we need as much as that as we can get right now.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other podcast.
It is. Yeah. We'll book that for 2029.
Uh, yeah, yeah. So you were working for a major tour operator in the 1990s. Can you talk to me about sort of what you've seen as some of the bigger tectonic shifts in the way we're thinking about group travel and our industry in general over the last few decades?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would say unequivocally the big have gotten bigger, is that they've been able to scale their operations. So even the Mayflower that I worked for in the 1990s is X number sizes larger than they were back in the day. The product line has shifted dramatically. We were primarily a domestic operator. And I think all these companies were these sort of legacy tour brands, Colette, Tauk, Mayflower, big domestic tour operations that kind of dip their toes in the overseas market. But once they realize that you make a whole lot more profit on a 10-day Eastern Europe trip than you do on a 5-day Branson trip, and you're going to get as many travelers interested in that, or even if it's 60% of the travelers, that certainly took hold as their major push forward. I think the sort of second tier of what I call these legacy tour operators are sort of they're family run businesses. There's not a great succession plan in them. They have a certain touring style that they work through. They have a certain client base. What we've seen, there's not a huge market for them, sort of aftermarket, whether that's private equity or a new owner coming through, because so many of the assets that are invested are in human capital. And it's Bob's tour company, and I travel with Bob because Bob has been here for 20 years. Well, if you remove Bob from the equation, what do you have? You've got a tour catalog and a website. So I think those are the operators that have really struggled to stay relevant, sort of doing general tours to general tourists. And then that sort of next wave that's come through, obviously there's been a monumental shift in the adventure travel business, active outdoor adventure. I think that's where a lot of this originated. So many great ideas sort of start in that industry because you get so many brilliant entrepreneurs that have come through. It's mind blowing the amount of thought leadership that happens in that sector. That's where we started to see sort of the splitting of some of these niches where you didn't have to be rappelling off of a bridge 800 feet above a canyon to be considered adventure travel. That sort of got into more, culinary focused, meet the people focused and such. And I think a lot of those operators are thriving, Mitch, because they have been able to really cultivate a certain travel style. They have relationships in local communities. You're going down to Patagonia, you're not staying at the Hyatt. Right. So, what is the lodging like? They have those relationships. They have the tour guides down there. And some companies have done that at scale. Companies like G Adventures and Intrepid have been able to scale that to where they're offering very authentic local tour products, but doing across the globe. And I think that's a really hard get that not many companies can achieve. But you don't have to do that to be successful, right? So yeah, I think really these sort of purpose-built operators, technology has gotten so much better. Right. Technology has gotten so much better over the last few years to where you don't need to operate your business off of spreadsheets and telephones. You can reach customers. You remember this when you were leading bus tours is your travelers were from your hometown. That's where they marketed. They, add in the yellow pages, right? Send a catalog to the local park districts and the senior centers, maybe work with some banks, but it was a very regional based operation. There are some companies that operate very effectively under that, and that's really cool if you can do that, but you don't have to do that anymore.
That's so interesting. You're right. There's this like blossoming of things that are both new and old. And you talk about like the legacy tour operator. They've been in business for a long time. One thing they're really, really good at is the human relationship part, like maintaining that customer. Like they are sometimes almost family members with a lot of their
Um,
travelers. And a lot of the new tourpreneurs that we work with need to be reminded that there's a lot of these analog relationship building, picking up the phone, having those phone calls. And it's not just about spending a lot on Facebook ads and getting your website perfect. It's a lot of just that basic relationship building that was learned almost the easy way back when that was how business was done 40 years ago. So it's like a relearning of these old lessons.
Yeah, especially if you're going to get into, high dollar trips where there's a lot of trust somebody's placing with you. People aren't buying that off of a click; they're buying it off of a relationship. And you've got to be human, and you've got to be able to be accessible through that. Technology is great at doing the back office stuff, but in creating that relationship where your clients become fanboys of what you do, that's sort of really where you've hit that. And I think looking at sort of those big legacy operators that have continued to grow, the reason they have is precisely from what you said, Mitch, is that they've maintained those relationships. Colette's a great example. They hire young college graduates, give them a company car and a laptop, go out on the road and call on groups and call on travel advisors. So you figure the optics of having a 24, 25-year-old young man in a suit coming into an office of a senior center where your client is a 64-year-old getting ready to retire. It's like, oh, you look like my grandson, right? I mean, so they're very smart, right? And these guys were also really good, but they were the local eyes and ears of that tour operation. Mayflower's done very much the same thing. Put boots on the ground. You got to have that relationship. If especially when you're talking about preformed groups, if something goes wrong, who's at the other end of the phone?
I can just see the job description: must have college degree and pinchable cheeks.
Yeah.
Um, you mentioned travel advisors. This is another sort of world in which it's been reinvented,
Mhm.
partially because of just the new annoyance of sorting through so many different options online, or especially as also more travel spend is happening higher up the economic ladder. Talk to me about how you're viewing sort of this world of travel advisors right now, which is kind of so in flux and evolving and resurging.
I think the good travel advisors are going to flourish over this time period. For a while, the conventional thought process was when we started to see all these retail storefronts closing was, they went to home base because they really couldn't afford to keep the business operating. And this was like just a stage in the evolutionary track of, no more travel agents. But, we found out that really wasn't the case. And there's a lot of really effective travel advisors out there, but getting back to what we talked about at the beginning, there aren't travel advisors that are selling airline tickets from Boston to Chicago for a leisure trip on a weekend. It's a very highly specialized client, and they're going to have certain areas that they're really good at. I think suppliers, particularly the big tourist boards, some of the larger destinations and cruise lines have created these specialist programs, and they've done a great job of signing up and getting people through these specialist programs. So where you know everything there is to know about a celebrity cruise, and I'm therefore a celebrity cruise specialist, I can tell you the difference between the ships and the itineraries. Because it's impossible. And I spent a really short period of time as a travel agent when I was young, and it was very difficult. Like some guy comes in off the street and wants to buy an Amtrak ticket. It's like, whoa, okay, like how do you start that process, right? So are you selling seaborne cruises or Amtrak tickets? And I think that the good advisors have made that decision. There are a plethora of agency groups today, consortia, franchises, and dealing with all different aspects, from virtuoso to cruise planners, in companies like that. So I think that the jury remains to be seen whether there's a pipeline of new agents coming into the marketplace, and I certainly hope that there are, because I think that creates a healthy environment where the agent is really the advocate for the client. That's what their job should be, and not everybody wants to deal with the minefield that is planning a complicated trip these days, especially when you're starting to add more people and more nuance to it. You want to have somebody that you can trust.
Yeah, that trust is a big thing. When you were on the panel at Tour Week TripCon,
Mhm.
you were with Madison from Batch and Carolyn Ray from Journeywoman, the 50 plus female traveler, the Gen Z traveler. What's your read on the way demographics are shifting, sort of not only in terms of age, but all of it? What
Yeah.
are you noticing?
Yeah, well, I love the 50 plus solo female traveler. I think that that's a really untapped market. Gen Z, the format that Batch has created and that marketplace that they've created, I think that makes a lot of sense for one-off trips. But on a sustainability basis, if you can develop a process around that sort of older demographic, again, we talked about earlier, sort of following the money. And that certainly seems to be where it is with the time, the money, and the wherewithal to want to do that. And, I think solo female travel is a bit of a misnomer, because you could be traveling solo on the airplane, then you get to the destination and you meet 16 other women and you embark on a journey together. So that's part of that solo movement, is that you're traveling alone. You don't have a friend base to go with. Maybe your husband doesn't like to travel. Maybe you're not married, um, whatever it may be. But you can also meet similar travelers that have interests like you do.
Yeah, yeah. It's also about removing stereotypes of the idea of this, like, oh, you're 50, so you just kind of like to waddle around
Yeah, going to
and
shops.
just yeah, yeah. No, they're climbing mountains or some of the most adventurous people. Just to close out, so we've captured kind of all of these different worlds of demographics, of niches. In in each of them are opportunities. Some of them also carry some threats. One of the threats that I'm noticing more and more as I talk to these operators that are targeting an older clientele is also a problem that I see kind of like the Colettes and the Taukes and the Globuses of the world having as well, which is you have a population that's also kind of aging out of travel. Somebody that has been your customer for the last 30 years is like no longer going to be
For sure.
your customer moving forward. Not to get too bleak. How are you seeing some of these older customers maintaining resilience in this like new this new world?
Yeah, I think it was a huge issue when we got into the baby boomer generation because this was the generation that just did not travel like their parents did. I think the operators have done a good job of adapting the product line to be more appealing to younger baby boomers. And they're seeing travelers in their 40s and 50s even joining. The transition to more small group trips, I think, has been very beneficial. The transition to slower trips to where you're not spending every single night in a new hotel and zipping around cities, more 2, 3, even 4 night stays, some even single hotel night stays. The river cruise phenomena has really buoyed many operators, right? Globus being one example, Top being another, in just the amount of river cruise ships, not only in Europe but also in the U.S. now. I think I've just read American Cruise Line is building like 7 new ships, just crazy. So there obviously that there's an appeal to that sort of lifestyle. So I think we probably don't like to think this, but invariably we end up like our parents. And, it might not happen right now, but, if you could be doing, solo Antarctica trips right now in your mid 40s, but, come back to me 25 years later when you broke a hip and, you can't remember where your passport is, 30% of the time. So I think our travel preferences shift a bit over time as well. And so I continue to see a real bright future for those legacy operators and any really appealing towards that marketplace. I mean, there's always going to be a new group that comes through. Yeah, certainly their travel styles are going to change, their desires will, but we're not inherently different.
Well, that was a bright and bleak way to end the podcast, but
I saw your eyes. You're like, no, not like my dad.
that was a good, yeah, dear Lord. No, I think it's true. Honestly, as I like entered into my 40s, and many people start to realize the inheritance that you have from your parents that is actually really great. We spend a lot of time running away from what we perceive them as, or some of us do, and now it feels like kind of a coming home to a
Hmm.
lot of their best traits. So I don't mind. I don't mind that accusation, but it's sort of interesting because I think I agree. You hit all of the ways in which, like through product, especially in marketing, these companies are kind of evolving. It's a fun and weird problem that I see these legacy companies also having because you want to please the old customer, but you also need to acquire new customers to maintain relevance.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's kind of like a band that's been playing a certain style of music, and then suddenly you go electric, and then you're like, are the fans going to follow?
Nobody wants to hear the new music. Just play the old classics.
Play the hits. Yep. Great. All right. Well, listen, Jeff, this has been absolutely illuminating. We'll have to have you on, I think, every other day just to like keep picking your brain of your experience and your expertise, tracking all of this. And what can our audience do to just like stay in touch with what you're putting out and how you're offering value to the world?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mitch. First of all, really appreciate the time and the opportunity to catch up with you. You're one of the brightest minds in the industry, truthfully. So, just it's always good to chew the fat with you, so to speak. Yeah, I'd say for anybody in the industry who's interested in more information on our products, we do free newsletters for each of the markets that we serve. So whether it's leisure group travel, destination reunions, student travel pro, destination film, sports planning guide. You can Google any of those brands, and when you get to the website, you're usually greeted with some sort of a newsletter offer. So that's the easiest way to keep in touch. Also, lots of free resources. We do white papers, special reports. Again, we do some print magazines in certain markets, digital guides and others. So if any of these markets are of interest to you, lots of free opportunities to get engaged in the community and to sort of learn what's happening from our eyes and from the eyes of our editors.
Speaking of chewing the fat, I wish you a happy holiday. And as an end of year little treat, I think this is going to be incredibly valuable to our listeners to get inspired for 2026. So thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you, Mitch.